All right, so I'll give a shorter introduction to myself. We'll talk about the basics at BLE. We'll talk about its architecture, a bunch of different tools and examples of how you can mess around with the protocol or get to learn better. And then, as always with these conferences, here to answer any and all questions and hear feedback also. If you think I said something wrong or you have a better fact about something, call me out, please. So again, a little bit about myself. During the 9 to 5, I'm a red team analyst at Vanguard. Outside of that, I again teach at Drexel University in their cybersecurity college, in their engineering college. They have an informatics school, so I'm kind of all over the place. You could have me for forensics, intro to cyber, all that different stuff. Outside of all the zeros and ones, I'm also the coach of the women's national team. So that picture on the left is the Women's USA inline hockey team. They've won the past 3 world championships back to back to back. So give them a quick round of applause. I have the easiest job in the world. I just open the door and say next. Right? It's pretty straightforward. If you're in the Philadelphia area and you're looking for a meetup that does some hands-on learning and you're trying to be curious, there's a meetup at Drexel called the Security Shell. Me and a couple other people manage that and run that, and our whole purpose is to get conferences and information like this, but disseminated a little bit quicker to maybe a smaller audience at a monthly scale instead of something you got to wait a quarter for or BSides for. What Chief Learning Officer means is I play in my basement a lot and I show people stuff, so it's not really that impressive. One of the first things I came across when looking at Bluetooth Low Energy is what's the difference between what we've been calling Bluetooth for 5, 6, 7 years, etc., and what's this smart, ready, and what's Bluetooth smart. So very simply, your regular Bluetooth is for what we call, or what we will call, enriched data, so large amounts of information, like a VoIP call or your Spotify playlist, things of that extent. Bluetooth Smart Ready is a device that can have enriched data like those calls, but it can also be a thing. It can mesh network, it can create a cluster of other BLE devices, and so it's got both abilities. And then Bluetooth Smart is they've completely dropped the traditional Bluetooth protocol, and they are only BLE. So that's Bluetooth Low Energy. So that's where the smart idea comes from. What's the point of Bluetooth Low Energy? Why is it different than Bluetooth? With the introduction and the scalability of Internet of Things, we needed a protocol that wasn't Zigbee, because that's probably the worst IoT protocol that was ever written. We're starting to wean off of Zigbee, because that was popular before BLE, but there wasn't an alternative in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, so we had the Zigbee Alliance. But now we have BLE, it's optimized for low power. Again, it's in that 2.4 gigahertz ISM band, so if you have your HackRF for different tools, that's where you would tune to. Simple state, one-off interaction. So again, not a lot of information is getting sent. Is the door open? Is the door closed? What's my blood pressure? What's my insulin count? A lot of these smart diabetic and insulin pumps are using BLE to talk from the sensor that's in the patient up to the pump to then relay what sugar should be, or insulin, excuse me, should be put back into that patient's body. So 2.4 versus 5, you'll see different versions of the BLE protocol. With everything, it's just grown in its maturity of both security and speed. So here's a quick example of kind of how we've scaled from 4.0 up to 5. You can see the throughput has gotten a lot better. Some of the things that's introduced with 5 that will be utilized by the industry is the beacon concept. So we can now track individuals in our stores and see if Susan spent a certain amount of time at this aisle, maybe Susan is expecting. There's been an actual incident where someone sent baby formula to someone because they used some of these tools and thought they were marketing correctly, and the individual wound up having a miscarriage and sued the company who sent them the letter because it was, after the fact, and they didn't like that. So it's used a lot in stores, it's used a lot in things. One of the things that I wanted to find when I was first studying BLE is how do I bring it back to like the TCP IP, right? I came from a network background and a network engineer. So what are we calling this L2 cap, and what is that at my layer 3 network level? All right, so that's basically its IP address. I can visualize that, and you start to work your way, and we'll do this throughout the presentation, up the stack, and you will correlate with what's actually happening from a TCP IP standpoint, or the OSI model. So BLE has 2 different types of channels. There's an advertising channel. Hey, I'm a device. Please someone connect to me. Here's how long I'll wait for a connection, things like that. And then once you make a connection, there's then the data channel. And one of the interesting things about BLE is that it has a lot of different data channels to choose from. So in the red, there's 37, 38, and 39 are the advertising channels. Everything else in the spectrum is meant for data to be transferred. And what's interesting about this is if you look at like 802.11, One of the things, you'd go into your router and say, like, this is channel 11 for our argument. You would change your router to channel 6 because you can notice that everyone in your neighborhood is using channel 11. You want to get less interference. With Bluetooth Low Energy, all these frequency channels are fair game. It's up to the engineer in their code to specify how they're going to hop around these channels. So during that connection request that we talked about that the advertising channel does, will be some information about what channels are going to be used, what algorithm are we going to use to hop. So again, in device discovery, we're advertising. Device is looking to be discovered, then we have a scanner. This is your phone, you know, Bluetooth Low Energy devices nearby. And you have a whole list of tiles and smart locks and all these watches now. Apple's a large list for all the wearables. And what you're looking for when you're trying to assess a Bluetooth device is this connection request. Because what's in that connection request, and we have a screenshot of one of the packets, is all the information that you're going to need to then follow that device, again, across all these channels. Because it's not going to just do 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. It's going to hop around, and that's specified in the code itself. So again, from a device connection standpoint, we have the advertiser who accepts the request from the scanner, and then the master who was originally the scanner. That doesn't sound like anything until you view this picture. This picture does a pretty good job of kind of visualizing what I just described. So we have the initial scanning and then the initiation. We have the advertising going on at the same time. And when both these slaves and masters come together, they create a connection request, one packet sent to the other device, and then they'll start to send data on that data channel. So you may see an advertising request on channel 37, and then a data channel happens somewhere else. So if you've ever used the Ubertooth, and you go, you're looking at the Ubertooth documentation 101, one of the first things it says when you try to look at a connection is to use the TAC F flag. So you'll do Ubertooth, TAC F, and then your device. That means follow. So what Ubertooth's doing is it's listening for one of these advertising requests, picking out the channel hopping algorithm, and then it's going to follow the device along its communication and hopefully catch read and writes to and from the BLE devices. That's what it looks at visually. If you want an understanding how is one piece of communication, again, hopping across all these channels, this is time correlation per the frequency. So you can see the orange link, the green link, and the blue link are all different conversations. They're all happening on the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. They're all BLE connections. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do they not run into each other? How do I join this band and then not bounce off orange every time or run into it? Right? How do we not have an IP address conflict if technically there's no DHCP server, right, that's handing out these addresses for all these rogue BLE devices? How do they mesh without running into each other? That's what we'll call an access address. The access address is what the BLE device broadcasts as part of that connection request, so that when you join this channel and start hopping, you know what devices to talk to because you're only talking to that access address or that quote-unquote IP address. If you dig back into the slides again, I'll make them available. If you wanted to take this home and dig into it, it's that slide that showed you the comparison of BLE to the TCP stack. So one of the things I start when looking at it from a reverse engineering standpoint is I try to teach myself as if I was an engineer with zero knowledge. Right? So what would I do as a low-level engineer, and I was tasked with the project of make this BLE device happen or make a BLE smart lock. So one of the papers I came across, and one of the things I started to realize before I even discovered the advertising channels and things like that, is only certain channels are used by BLE devices. So one of my main questions, well, how do we determine said channels versus advertising data, etc.? Has anyone ever heard of MATLAB? Right? So it's the engineering software that does a lot of really advanced simulations. So that's one of the things, quote unquote, I leveraged in reverse engineering. I was looking at MATLAB and I asked MATLAB in all their documentation, where is your 101 on creating Bluetooth low energy devices? So this is a screenshot from MATLAB and kind of how they walk you through creating a device. And as you can see, we specify an access address and then we specify channels used. So these are the channels that the device will hop around during its communication. But that's totally up to the developer at the time of developing what channels are used. So it's not going to be, once I find out how one device hops, they're all going to hop the same. That's part of the pain in the butt of following a Bluetooth low energy device, is you have to connect. You have to grab the connection request first, and then all the subsequential packets are able to be followed. But without that information, you're kind of stuck. So again, what's in this connection request? We've been talking about it. Slave latency, which is very interesting. How often should I listen? So you may catch a device writing to one device, and in that connection request packet it says, I wake up every 30 minutes and check in. So now you know if you're going to write to that device, if it's outside of that 30-minute window, it's never going to accept your information. It only listens at that interval. So you might have to plan your attack around it. Another interesting one is the supervision timeout. What's the max time between two received data packets before I consider the connection lost? So if you go and send the unlock command from your phone to your door, is your door sitting there waiting for another 7 minutes, a potential another unlock code? And could I replay that same code back, and would it work? We have a video of a smart lock where we do that exact thing. We captured in the lab someone unlocking the device, and then we were able to then replay it. So it's a very important part. You might want to remember it for later. Once you get connected from the BLE's connection request, you're now starting to transfer information. So you need to have a process to do that. In Bluetooth, we call that the GATT, or the Generic Access Profile. Again, its job, in the beginning when you're just broadcasting, it will handle the broadcast request. It will initially get you connected with peers, and it will also establish a secure connection, which we know is device pairing. So there's a couple ways of device pairing. There's Just Works. Just Works is when you click the BLE device and you just get connected. Sometimes there's a passcode. Repeat the code that's on my screen into this device, or you're joining your phone to your car. Is what you see on your car's informatics system the same as your phone? That's part of handling the profile itself. So the GAP has some other roles. Again, we talked about it being a broadcaster. One of the main differences we mentioned between Bluetooth and BLE is its ability to mesh network. So think of IoT in the storefront where we want to lay a bunch of beacons and sensors down and have them all be able to relay back. So that's what we call central. And then we have devices that connect to that, your peripherals. And then an observer is just someone who's looking for that advertising data. So again, words, visual is kind of how the presentation will work. Here's what it would look like if the red circle was the central hub of, we'll say, Target, and then all our other sensors were put throughout the store. They will mesh network themselves, and they will ultimately report back to the hub or the master itself. So we mentioned a little bit about GAP handling security. So in BLE Security, there's devices known as characteristics. Basically, that's what you're reading and writing from a BLE device, these characteristics. When a client or someone tries to access a characteristic, what's called the Security Access Manager would require you, again, is it Just Works? Is it a PIN? There's different methods of authenticating and encrypting that Bluetooth communication, but that's what's going to happen at the GATT level. Now we have a secure connection. We have an access address. We know what channels we're hopping. Now what are we going to write to and why? That's what we call the generic attribute protocol. The attribute protocol itself is how the information gets moved to and from, and then the GATT is what it's called, is actually what's formatting the information. It's your organizer, it's your syntax, it's things of that extent. So when you establish a connection to a BLE device, you will enumerate all its characteristics, or what is its GATT profiles that are available. And you'll find things like UUIDs, which is a uniquely identified device or a characteristic that you can write to. There's different roles. Is this something that I can read? Is this something I can read and write? And then there's your permissions. So am I allowed to read and write after or before authentication? When you look at the GATT, some of them have SIGs, which is special interest groups. If you make an insulin pump or a heart monitor, something to that extent, there will be an institution that standardizes how you communicate that information within the GATT profile itself. You might hear that referred to again as a SIG. That slide get double? Okay, here we go. So the GATT, again, uses that attribute protocol. It transports and organizes the data. The server is going to receive that request, send the response back, again, after a secure connection's been made. The client is basically doing service discovery and acquires attributes about the server itself. So what's inside that packet that gets passed that has this information? So again, we talked about how it's encapsulated with this at header and then the at data. Most of the information that you replay is this. This is the read command and the write command to unlock the lock, or we'll demonstrate the potential of getting an interpreter session because someone's using a Bluetooth keyboard. So this is where you're going to put the information that you're sending in that request. So again, how does the GATT organize the data? There's a handle. So where am I writing to? What's the attribute address, you may hear it referred to as? What type of it? Is this a service? Again, not all of them are going to have things to interact. You may just need to read something. You may, again, just be reading the heart rate. You may be reading the insulin level, very small amounts of information. What's its profile? Is it vendor specific, excuse me. What value does the information have? Is it data? Is it just metadata? And then again, what permissions do you have? Are you allowed to read, write? Is the information encrypted? Does it require authentication? That's how the GATT is going to handle data organization. Inside that packet, this is what it would look like. So we would have the attribute handle. Where are we writing to? What type of attribute? What's its value? And then what's its permission? That was a 101 into the protocol, how you would talk to and from a device. Next, we'll talk about all the things you'll want on your workstation if you want to play around with BLE devices. This is the part where everyone takes the screenshot. Again, a version of this slide is on my LinkedIn. If you reach out to my email that I'll leave at the end, I have it on GitHub, things to that extent. I make these presentations to share them. I've heard 100 people say you can get this stuff working in VMs. I've scratched that. I would prefer a dedicated Linux machine. I just don't see the peripherals handing off the information, dealing with all the headache of VMware or VirtualBox. I have a System 76 laptop. It runs Ubuntu. Troll me for that, but it's a dedicated wireless testing rig. It's got all my SDR tools. I know everything's going to be stable. You can have Kali Linux if you want, and there's a really cool command to give yourself the whole arsenal that Kali has to offer. Definitely get a cup of coffee while this is happening. But if you do apt-get install Kali Linux tac and then tab complete it, there'll be what's called the Kali Linux top 10, which is the top 10 tools and things that people use in Kali Linux. There's Kali Linux SDR, which would give you everything you would need to use a Hack RF or a Blade RF. There's Kali Linux Wireless, or there's Kali Linux All, which just gives you every possible tool that Kali Linux could have to offer. What I specifically download is in the middle. So Kismet, I use at my house, and there's a great talk I'm going to definitely check out to see if there's anything I can add to my system. But I use Kismet as my house as my IDS. What Kismet's really good at is setting a baseline of known devices and then triggering alerts on anything new. So you lay down Kismet, you give it a month of learning of what your environment is, and then you check it once, every other week when I have some free time. And if there's a new BLE device, I'll look at the alerts, and then I can go explore that device further if I own it, right? But GATT tool. We talked about reading and writing to these GATT services, and it's going to be a tool that lets you just simply connect to a BLE device and then rewrite whatever you captured in Wireshark right to it. So we have a video demoing that. BetterCap, very useful tool. You can use this tool to inject keystrokes into an operating system that's using a wireless BLE keyboard. We have a video that demonstrates that. The HCI tool, think of that like a ping sweep for BLE. You can run HCI tool LES scan, and it will just start enumerating the BLE advertising channels and print you out all the MAC addresses that are currently beaconing or available for connection. You'll see watches, you'll see tiles, you'll see things. You may see Kivo. Kivo is a smart lock, so see that, you might be near a home or something to that extent. All these tools and everything get put into Wireshark for just a little bit easier digestion and filtering and things of that extent. Jacket is a tool that lets you auto-exploit the BLE keyboard. So you can use Jacket to walk around with some modified hardware, and if it spots a BLE keyboard, it will send a Ducky script to that device for it to execute. If you're not familiar with a Ducky script, it's basically automating human keystrokes in a text file and can type a heck of a lot faster than you'd be able to get to the terminal and do yourself. Beetlejack is a great tool. It uses two really cheap pieces of hardware known as BBC microbits. You see there on the right. And what it does is it allows a full man-in-the-middle framework for a Bluetooth attack where you can spin up a rogue GATT server and get those connection requests and get that information and then forward it on to the drone or the thing or whatever you're taking a look at from a research standpoint. I was told to make a special shout out to Blue Hydra for anyone that's going to do the wireless CTF. This is a tool that will let you track a BLE device, so you can feed it a Mac and you can walk around looking for the Fox. You'll get a ding ding from your laptop if you're close enough. The Blue Hydra is a very useful tool if you're going to do the wireless CTF. Hardware standpoint, we have your Ubertooth one and your onboard BLE card. Your Ubertooth 1 is a spectrum analyzer and listener. It's not meant to send and receive. That is your capture device. Your onboard BLE card, or if you bought a third-party one that you plugged in, that would be what you're going to send a lot of the commands from. A rooted device, or just developer mode on an Android phone, what that allows you to do is read and write to the thing that you want to test, and then from your phone you can pull the PCAP directly off and get whatever you sent from your phone in clear text before it hit the encryption phase or anything. So if you wanted to see what was actually being sent to the IoT device, you would turn on, for Android example, developer mode, and you would turn on HCI Snoop. And then you would mess around with the thing for a half hour, and then you would connect to it with the Android debugging bridge, and you would pull off the PCAP to your local workstation, and you'd open up Wireshark, and you would have that conversation from your phone to the thing right there in front of you. The Logitech Unifying Receiver, that is the little plug-in that's got the star on it that says, I'll work with anything Logitech. There was a piece of research called MouseJack, where you can flash that with custom firmware that, again, will send those ducky scripts to any BLE device that you spot. The ESP32 is a 2.4 gigahertz wireless and Bluetooth microcontroller that you can flash with a Bluetooth low energy capture the flag, and we have all the instructions later in the slides. And then again, we talked about the micro bits. You're going to use them with BeetleJack and create this man-in-the-middle environment for BLE. So with all those tools on your workstation, how do you go about doing it? I kind of broke it into 4 simple phases. Sniff and reconnaissance. So what's in my proximity, and can I actively listen or passively listen for someone creating an active connection? Because what I'm going to get out of that is that connection request. And then I'm going to start capturing, because once I hit, again, TAC F in my Ubertooth, I'm going to follow across all these different frequency hopping channels and that access address. Now I look in Wireshark. Most of the time in these BLE devices, they're not encrypted. So there's no obfuscation of the information. Most sophisticated I've seen with some base 64 stuff. But that's that. And I say exploitation, but it's basically just replaying. A lot of the attacks I've seen is getting that information, and once you know that value, you may even be able to permutate that value enough where when you replay it, you can get some execution or the device to do something. So the first video is going to be us setting up the Ubertooth to listen, because there's some things you got to do on Wireshark that aren't really talked about. You can find it on Ubertooth's website, but again, I always think it's good to show people. So we have to make a temp space, basically, for us to push traffic. So what I did is I just created a temp space. And now what I'm going to go into Wireshark and do is I'm going to add an interface. There it is. So when you add this interface, see how there's an option for pipes? I'm going to point it to that pipe I just created in the terminal right before this. So temp/pipe. Now I have a pipe. I have Wireshark listening to said pipe by selecting it and clicking start. But there's no traffic because, again, I haven't told the Ubertooth try to follow a connection and to push all that traffic, or TAC C, to my temp space. So now I push it, and now you see things on the screen. And now when we come back, all you're seeing is advertising packets, because we haven't caught a connection request yet. We haven't got the information that's going to allow us to start hopping accordingly. But with enough patience and enough of joining your device to and from, you'll get this guy. And here's everything you need. It's how long it times out, it's its latency, it's intervals, window size, all that good stuff. How long do I need to wait, or when can I next connect to this device? And once you grab that packet, Wireshark will start following it across these frequency channels that it's hopping. And you'll start to see the attribute protocol be used to write. So this is a capture of a smart light bulb. Again, these values could be replayed, change the color. The argument I got back from the vendor was, who cares if someone can remotely change the color? There's no real risk. So what we did is we plugged 10 of them into a switch, and we shut the phone off, and then we blew the circuit breaker of the outlet strip. It could cause a brownout. It's not about data. One of my researches in the IoT is not about getting information. It's about that BLE is running the water meters now for Philadelphia. They were Zigbee. They're in the process of upgrading them to BLE. So now we could cause actual real damage with it. So we got the attribute protocol. Then you're going to start to listen for when it writes to certain handles. So this is a really sophisticated smart lock. So we have my password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I wrote it I wrote it to the handle X002D. And then the next thing you write is to a different handle, and you write 01. So what did we do in the lab? Is we took that same lock. Again, this is built off of someone else's research. This wasn't my vulnerability that I discovered. It's called the Quick Lock. If you want to research it, I believe it was DEF CON 24. The talk is hacking Bluetooth locks from a quarter-mile away. That was what inspired some of my research. That gentleman did a really good job. The GitHub is here for all the tools that he made out of the research. But what we have in the video demoed is, you can see we started with GATT tool tag capital I, which means I want to be interactive. MAC address, and once it highlights blue, I know that I have a BLE connection that's valid. I can do a character write request. So I'm going to write a character to an attribute handle, and what you're going to see, hopefully if it wants to work. The character write request to that handle that it was expecting the password. And this was version 2 of the vulnerability, where they sent the password twice. That was their fix for version 1. They just doubled it. So then we come back, we write to that other handle, just a 0 and 1, which means after you authenticate, you now have the ability to write to that handle, and with that becomes unlocking the device. So again, that's your telnet vulnerability of Bluetooth, I call it. It's very simple. It's fun to get started with, and if you're interested, it's just called Quick Lock, and they're still available on Amazon, so you can buy one and have some fun. But one of the questions I got asked when doing my research, when I was pen testing at the time, is my managing consultant was like, "This is all cool, but I need you to weaponize this. Like, show me how this could be used on a pen test. I love what you do in your basement and nerding out, but this needs to translate to what you do." So here comes BetterCap, and this was funny. This device right here, you can't see in the screenshot, is my Logitech. It's the #1 Logitech keyboard. It's got the nice cushions at the bottom. He's shaking his head like, yeah, that's everyone uses it. So that's the one I was going to test. I didn't realize that like half my neighborhood was going to be vulnerable. There's like 20 other HID devices that I could have been just getting shells on everybody. But we keep it kosher. We keep it ethical. But one of the things you can do is, again, you can sniff, because some of the ones that are so bad, Microsoft, they'll just send it in clear text. You can get keystroke for keystroke what the person's typing. Or you can inject. So to inject, we use a tool called, again, Jacket. The reason I use Jacket over BetterCap is because you can get Jacket to work on like Arduino level hardware and make it like a really small piece of hardware, and it just sits in your back pocket. And all it has on the SD card is the Ducky script, and you set it to auto pawn. So every time, and that's one of the things, before I ran this, I'd have to do a survey for the client. Be like, all right, this is just your building, these are just your devices, because the moment I start walking your campus, I can't get yelled at because I got shell on the 3rd floor, which wasn't your business. We had to make sure that they own the right space. But once you get to that type of setup, you can have, so right here, you can see, and excuse the 9 Red Bulls that I was in when I filmed this video. You'll see when I start. The bottom of my screen is Jacket finding a device, and then here's my Windows laptop. So we're going to have some fun with that. So just again, quick proof of concept, but you could have that Ducky script do anything. I just had it, bring up a cat. So build your own CTF. We went over all the tools. Maybe you don't have a BLE device. The ESP32 is as cheap as $12 if you go to WishKey or these other micro electronic sites. So it's not an expensive piece of hardware to get your hands on. You can flash it with the firmware, and then you have a nice capture the flag for yourself. So there's 2 different ones. The BLE CTF, this first one, is kind of your 101. So if you're just getting started, you're going to have a lot of fun with that one. Some of the flags for that one is, hey, write to this handle and then listen for the response. Or write to this handle 100 times, and at the 101 response, you'll get the flag. And then there's one that's a little more advanced. He calls the BLE CTF Infinity. But again, you can complete all of this with just BetterCap, GATT tool, and HCI tool. So you don't, even if the Ubertooth is out of your budget for the time being, I know it's an expensive piece of hardware, it's a little over $100, you could jump into learning right out of the gate with, you know, $30 investment. So you could connect to the capture the flag, and you could get all the UUIDs, and GATT tool's good for writing, but it doesn't do a good job of enumerating and actually looking at the services like something like BetterCap would. So here's the CTF when you connect to it in BetterCap. So listen to me for multiple notifications. Listen to this handle for a single indication. So there'll be all the different flags that you have to read to, and then the first one is how you check your score. So if you wrote with GATT tool to that address, and you wrote that information, and you read it, it would tell you how many flags you've submitted at the time of completing the CTF. If you want to start it over, unplug it, plug it back in, it reboots, you can go back to hacking. So really good way of getting started, super useful, super cheap. That was everything I had. Again, thanks for coming out. Questions, concerns, boos, comments? Yeah. So it can be randomized, it could be hard-coded, but it's going to be something that's specified on the engineering side, or at least in the connection request side. It's not something that user side you would be able to manipulate or update. But there has been research into spoofing it, right? Like when I make a rogue device, can I mimic the access address and get all that information before forwarding it? That becomes a proximity-based attack, just like any wireless attack. But that's kind of that from that. Um, 100%. So the IEEE is going to have everything that gets you up to the GATT layer. And then from GATT up is API calls and how they want to serve the information up. But from 1 to 4, you're looking at it from the TCP/IP standpoint. You're going to find those information from IEEE. That's going to be the certification body that says, here's the standard. And then everything else is up to the APIs and the developers, because you only get to that point. That's hard-coded, basically. That's how it works. Then you interact with it through APIs and different calls. Yeah, so one of the things that's really bad is when you go, well, I want my device to connect really quick, and I don't want to wait for information, so we're only going to use 3 data channels. And that they're going to use these 3. Yeah. The sweet spot seems to be 7. 7 channels is what I traditionally figured out is what's used. Anything up or below, I can't speak to whether that's more or less secure, because once you have the connection request, you have that ability to follow. So no matter how many channels, right? But then it becomes, I was saying this earlier, like time, place, score. Am I listening at the right time in the right place when the information's set? That's what's such a pain in the butt about tracking these devices. You have to be very patient. You may write 100 times and just by the luck of it, you didn't get there. When Ubertooth followed him and jumped to that channel and you went over here and wrote. It's a very interesting protocol to try to reverse engineer. Anybody else? Yeah, so right out of the gate, your standard Bluetooth LE card is said to have 150 meters of proximity. I haven't delved into like the antenna, like the Yagi, like from the wireless standpoint, right? I've done the wireless engagements where I'm in my car and the Yagi's pointed at the building. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole from a far distance BLE, but that talk I mentioned, hacking Bluetooth from a quarter mile away, I'm fairly certain he did hook his Ubertooth or some other BLE hardware device to a cantenna or something to that extent, and was able to extend his distance. Ready? All right, well, thank you. I'll give you back the rest of your conference.